Dude, that's insane. That's like maxed out settings. That's insane. Let's see if I can keep up the momentum. We're gonna go to PUBG next. So, if I know anything about my lovely viewers, I know that you guys value performance, you value a budget, and you value absolute price per dollar when it comes to that glorious, glorious FPS. Well, today, the machine I'm going to be showing you, or the pairing that I'm going to be showing off, is exactly that. So let's kick into it. So I'm not going to bore you by listing off every single spec that each of these components has. You can easily find those out by just searching them on Google. I'm going to show you actually what you came here for, which is what product you should buy, what performance you can get out of it, and my reaction to them. But to start us off, we have the E3 1220 V2 Xeon. I remember that off the top of my head. I'm getting better at this, guys. I really am. Which is a 4-core, 4-thread Xeon chip for the LGA 1155 platform, which the LGA 1155 I can make a whole other video on because I love this socket. It's not great if you want to keep using it down the road, but if you want to build a very cheap PC for a friend or a LAN party or something like that, they're very easy to find, they're pretty cheap. There's a lot of different form factors. You can find some with USB 3 in them, which is pretty freaking great. This motherboard right here, it's not very important. I looked it up at one point, but I can't be bothered to look it up again. You can get your generic LGA 1155 motherboard. That will take Xeons. You can check the motherboard site for compatibility. If I wasn't recommending the Xeon, I would have been recommending the i5-3470. But I went to do this video a couple weeks ago. I was going to order one and actually noticed that it went up in price by about $5 to $8. Which doesn't sound that bad, but considering that it was $20 when I originally was going to make the video and recommend it, another $5, $8 is kind of a big deal. So I went on the hunt for a similar CPU with the same socket that provides the same performance is $20. And that's why I ended up with the Xeon E3 1220 V2. I got that twice in a row. I'm on a roll, brothers. But this is a very competitive CPU for the price. Obviously, you're buying it used. They're not making them new at this point. But there are a lot of eBay sellers that are ripping these out of server machines from years past and then selling them for, $20. So that's why I ended up recommending this one. It is an absolute great pairing for the RX 470 that we're going to be putting in the machine. And again, you can find the LGA 1155 socket that it goes into pretty easily. If you pair that with a cheap 8GB stick of RAM and a generic Intel stock cooler, you are off to the races on building your super speedy, super budget, price to performance value machine, patent pending. So with the Xeon, I've already mentioned it before, but we are putting in a RX 470 4GB card. Generally, nowadays, you can find them anywhere from $60 to $80, depending on what deals you get. It doesn't particularly matter what brand or what version you get. Whenever you're buying a SKU of card, they usually fall in a close enough spectrum of performance that one isn't insanely better than the other. As long as the thermals are okay and it doesn't sound like a jet engine, it's a pretty good graphics card in my opinion. So any RX 470 that has relatively okay reviews will work perfectly fine. So with that said, the end list is that Xeon E3 1220 V2. That's the third time I held up 5 fingers. Well, actually, I guess I'm holding 3 on both. So third time, the RX 470, which is a pretty great value GPU for the price. If you're paying 60 to 80, I wouldn't pay any more than that. And then your motherboard, your RAM, and your Intel stock cooler or CPU cooler of your choice. With all of this, you can easily make this part of the build happen under 150 bucks, maybe even under 125 if you're really scrimping and saving. That leaves you a few other things to grab, like a case and a power supply and then some sort of storage, but you can easily put the whole system together for 200 bucks. I could part out every little piece, but those things are up to how much you want to invest and what you want it to look like. These are the core components that, if you're looking to build a cheap PC, this is what you can grab, and then everything else is kind of accessories to that. So I'll leave that up to you. So that's the overall gist of what we're doing. We'll now be getting into the benchmarks so you can see how they actually perform, and you can judge for yourself if this is a good deal that you'd like to build or not. I tried my best not to fill this with unnecessary specifications and gigahertz and clocks and memory speeds that you don't need to know, because really all you're interested in is what parts I'm recommending. These are the parts I'm recommending. Anyway, let's get to benchmarking. So to start off, we're running some Superposition benchmark. It's a pretty standard benchmark that a lot of different cards have been run through, so you can kind of get a good idea of exactly where this lands. Again, it should probably only stress the GPU mainly. The CPU just has to be there, and then it should be able to run pretty well. We're going to be running it at 1080p medium, which is about where we should be landing with all of our settings with all the different games we're testing today. But we're looking for that 60 FPS or pretty close to, so let's get into it. So far, looks like we're hitting more around mid-50s. We are seeing 100% GPU utilization, so that's good. The CPU is chilling at around 20%, which is about expected. So, you know, maybe a little bit less than medium. Maybe if we had like 1 or 2 settings change, we'd hit that 60 FPS, but, you know, close enough is good for me, but we'll see how it actually does in real games now. So, as we can see, I'm actually driving around now versus running the in-game benchmark, but we're seeing 80%, 90% utilization with the CPU and 100% with the GPU. So, that pairing that I mentioned earlier, where they're pretty close, you know, evenly matched, is working very well, at least with GTA 5 in mind. But we're easily seeing FPSs above 60 with very high settings at 1080p, which blows my mind that for, I don't know, 100, 150 bucks, depending on how you price out the rest of your parts, you're playing very high GTA 5 at 1080p. Like, that's pretty incredible. I love used tech. I love deals like this. But with the average FPS, because I was running a little benchmark during that, we hit 88 FPS average. It's more than acceptable to me. So GTA 5, done and dealt with. We'll move on to the next one. Dude, that's insane. That's like maxed out settings. That's insane. Let's see if I can keep up the momentum. We're going to go to PUBG next. I mean, you have to think about this, right? Like, this is a computer, which is already better than a console due to the fact that you have like a bunch of, you know, customizability that you can do with it, right? Yeah. And this is cheaper than secondhand last-gen consoles on like Facebook Marketplace. Like, and it performs way better. I love computers. So, we're in PUBG. No, we should probably actually start benchmarking. There we go. So we're in PUBG. We're in the little training mode. That's usually where I go to test the PUBG FPS, because it's close enough to what you would get in a normal map and not having to ruin a whole game by going in. But anyway, we're seeing around 80 FPS on medium, which isn't anything super spectacular, especially with, you know, competitive FPS games like PUBG and the like. You're going to want probably 120 FPS for that 120 Hz monitor, but considering the price of this thing, if really all you're aiming for is 60, you could probably bump this thing up to high and get 60, or you can play it on medium and get closer to 100. So I think it's a little give and take there, but again, we're seeing the CPU and GPU pair very well together. The GPU's locked at about 100, the CPU's bouncing from 60 to 80 in between there. They're very close neck and neck on bottlenecking each other, which is exactly what you want to see. But after running around for about 5-10 minutes in the training area, we have an average FPS of 84, and that's pretty impressive. That's pretty freaking impressive, honestly. I mean, again, it's medium, it's PUBG, it's not anything insane, but think about the price. 150 bucks. That's pretty freaking great. So now we're over into Rainbow Six Siege. We're running it on the high settings at 100% render scaling, and we're seeing an average of 130 FPS. I'm just running the benchmark for this one because my aim is not all that fantastic, and I don't want to show you guys that. Rainbow Six Siege is definitely more GPU intensive than CPU intensive, so we're seeing the CPU hovering around 60-70%, and the GPU is about 100% locked. And I mean, yeah, playing it high, you get that 120 Hz refresh rate. You could probably lock it with VSync just to make sure. It's pretty great. I mean, that's exactly what you want out of a competitive shooter like Rainbow Six Siege. So again, price or performance, it's still impressing me. I don't think it's going to stop. But yeah, we ended with a 120 exactly as an average frame rate. Cool beans. So even knowing the results before I was going in, it still surprises me every single time that I put a system like this together that Xeon and that RX 470 really just go perfectly hand in hand. Again, I would have recommended the i5 3470, but since the price has been going up due to COVID, that Xeon, which is pretty easily available due to server machines and stuff being broken down and sold as parts, it's super cheap, easily available, works very well. It's on a older platform, so the motherboards are easier to find. Again, with that, DDR3 RAM, easy to find. Everything about this just makes me so giddy and happy. This is such a great bang for buck, value for money, FPS per dollar, whatever you want to say. It's not exactly the best computer to build if you're looking into upgrading it slowly or changing parts out down the line. If you try to use a faster CPU in this, like the i7-3770, it's a lot of money invested for an old platform. It's not going to be that fast. You're not going to be able to push a graphics card that hard. So that's kind of pointless. So the motherboard and the RAM and the CPU are kind of going to become e-waste once you're done with it. And the GPU, if you replace that without replacing any of the other components, you're going to start running into massive CPU bottlenecks. I wouldn't go any faster than the 470 because that's kind of my limit at the low end of what is an acceptable gaming performance at this point. Being able to run medium or high settings at 1080p with modern games at around 60 to 100 FPS is really the bottom that I would aim for. So the 470 is absolutely perfect for that, but I wouldn't go with like a 700 series NVIDIA card or a R9 290 or anything like that. Also, anything less than 4 gigabytes of VRAM, you're going to start running into a lot of issues there as well. But anyway, with my spiel over and my advice foretold to you, that really does wrap up the video. I hope you were impressed with the performance as much as I was, and I hope that any of you that were looking for cheap ways of getting into PC gaming now have a plethora of ideas in mind. But that basically wraps it up. I hope you learned something. If you did, hit that like button. If you didn't, and you thought this is a Frankenstein monster that should have been put down as soon as it was built, hit that dislike button. If you want to see more of my PC flipping adventures and tests and shenanigans, hit that subscribe button. I will try my best to keep you around. Without further ado, have a good day, guys.